Hello and welcome to a special live 420 episode of the Talking NorCal podcast, the official podcast of Active NorCal. I am your host, Zach O'Brien. With me here, as always, it's
Bobby Buds. It's 420.
Bobby Buds.
Bobby Buds.
Bobby Buds is in celebration mode. He's wearing some odd green getup here.
Weed green leisure suit, we like to call it.
So is this one of your big holidays of the year?
Sure. I mean, it is for all Northern California. In fact, all of the planet is celebrating 420 today.
That's true. It's an interesting day out of the year. There's always a little bit more hop in everyone's steps.
And today it falls on Taco Tuesday.
Oh, are you making tacos today?
I saw a meme. We've been preparing for this.
Well, so I don't know how everyone out there is celebrating this fine 420, but we celebrated by watching Hulu's brand new docuseries, true crime docuseries, Sasquatch. And we watched it immediately when it came out, and we are ready for a full live review of this fantastic docuseries. I really enjoyed it, actually, and so we're going to go deep into it, and we are going to have some fun live. If you guys are watching this, follow us, Talking NorCal, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Also Active NorCal, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. Follow us everywhere. Share this with your friends. We really appreciate the support, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. I got nothing else to say because I just want to talk about this docuseries. So let's start with the Tahoes, hell in NorCal.
NorCal, we're hell in NorCal, and I could spend all day just chilling in the South Bay. We're NorCal, we're hell in NorCal, and there are no saladudes who kick it down in Santa Cruz. Or NorCal, we're hell in NorCal, and we get a little cray-cray when we visit the East Bay. We're NorCal, we're hell in NorCal.
It's the 420 live pod, and we are very excited. I had a blast watching this docuseries. I was already really interested to go into it, and it brought me in a couple times just based off of the fascination behind the area of the Emerald Triangle and sort of the culture behind it. But not only that, but the mystical feel of the area, most notably Bigfoot. So let's start. And here's how we're going to do this. We're going to go into sort of some of the general themes of the film, the history of the area, the culture of the area, and then we're going to save all the spoilers of this and our sort of reviews till the end.
So if you're watching this and it's towards the end of the video, you will be seeing and hearing some spoilers in this, so stay tuned for that.
Yes, I will make sure to let you know when spoilers are coming up. But here's the gist of the show as it was presented to us before we started watching it. There's this journalist, David Holthouse, who heard this story when he was trimming in the 90s. He was trimming up in the Emerald Triangle. He heard this story of a triple murder of some cannabis growers up there, and they were ripped limb from limb, and it was this bloody scene, and all of their cannabis was left. It wasn't a robbery. And so he heard this story, and he remembered it his entire life, and he decided to go back, whatever this is, 25 years later or something like that. I can't do math. And sort of investigate what actually happened. We all know the stories of Sasquatch in Northern California, specifically in the Redwood area. So he used this story from the 90s to go on this wild true crime adventure trying to solve this murder, right? And in such, maybe try to solve whether Bigfoot exists or catch a murderer, right? So it was, I was really fascinated because the story meets in this weird realm of the Emerald Triangle. In the Emerald Triangle, it's Mendocino County, Trinity County, and Humboldt County, which is, the biggest cannabis producing region in the world, possibly. And they sort of meet because growers and Sasquatch are both looking for the same areas, right? Remote, inaccessible areas with flowing water. And this is what they're saying in the film. So what was your initial, like, did you enjoy it? It was darker than I thought it would be.
Well, the first thing that really drew me in was the guy who made it.
Yes.
David Holthouse. Has done some documentaries that I really enjoyed. Docuseries specifically, Night Stalker. He did a couple other ones. So I had high expectations for it. I have mixed reviews. I had mixed emotions going through it. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the specifics. But I was really excited. We grew up in Northern California. You know, what Northern California has, and I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, is we have the best wine growing region in the world, and we have the best weed growing region in the world, and they're really close to one another.
Yeah.
You know, you go Napa County, you go a little bit more north and west, you hit kind of Mendocino, Humboldt, Trinity, the Emerald Triangle, as they call it, which produces some of the highest quality marijuana in the world. And as you mentioned, Sasquatch really enjoys that same kind of area, the vegetation that weed grows so well. So I was very excited about it because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I am a weed consumer myself. I have been for many years, and I've always enjoyed the idea of Sasquatch. So especially this dropping on 420 and being very weed themed, even in the trailer, super, super excited me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because one of the gentlemen that was interviewed in this film, in this docuseries, which we'll get to all the characters because this it was full of like crazy characters. But he mentioned, you know, where almost like the Mendocino-Sonoma County line, once you cross it, it becomes really bad for growing weed and really good for growing wine, and vice versa, right? It's this weird line, and I'm guessing it's that like coastal precipitation.
A little bit more cooler, a little bit mild.
Exactly.
More mild. Wine likes really high heats, whereas weed likes the same kind of environment, but a little bit more moisture and a little bit cooler temperature.
And they really go into why cannabis grows so well. And they even know the different specific regions of the Emerald Triangle where, you know, plants grow to be 12 feet tall. And
just like the difference between Sonoma and Napa County, you know, they're right next to one another, but they grow very drastically different wines. So it's very similar to that.
Yeah. So first and foremost, this was somewhat of a dark movie, and as much as on Active NorCal we cover the positive, the beauty, that is sort of ignored in this documentary. Like, it gets into the dark realm of the Emerald Triangle, much like Murder Mountain.
I was just going to say, unlike every other kind of Sasquatch-oriented film, this one was very much more Murder Mountain.
And there are some similarities, right?
Totally.
And during certain sections of this docuseries, there's some similarities, some similar stories from Murder Mountain. So they really go into the history of the region, and I want to talk about it because I find it fascinating. You know, we have this, we call it the Redwood Curtain, where not a lot of people go there. Even like the tourism, you know, industry. I mean, it's so beautiful there. They have a national park, they have the ocean, but really it's somewhat small because that Redwood Curtain makes it really difficult to get in there. But the overall history, I mean, they talked about early on in the gold rush, the Wyatt tribe was massacred basically by the gold rush people. They talked about the massacre of 1860 where they killed up to 250 Wyatt. And so they're saying, you know, already like some gold rush people came in and they weren't necessarily good people. They were opportunists. They were selfish, they were greedy, and they were trying to take advantage of the land. Then they go into the logging industry of the redwoods, which is terrible, and obviously it does not exist anymore because they've designated these as national forests and natural landmarks. And that's another, you know, it's a dark side of Humboldt where you have these 1,000-year-old trees that they're just chopping down. You know, and it really goes into sort of how dark characters have run this wilderness setting as sort of like a Wild West scenario.
It's really
for 150 years.
It's greed driven.
Yes.
You know, the gold rush gold was the entity. The logging, those logs were very valuable, and so they were selling them as lumber, and that was the next gold rush, that was kind of the green rush before the green rush. But it has all, just like you're saying, greed driven, it's all, we're going to take this stuff because we can, and we see value in it, that we're going to just make money by exploiting other people.
Right. And it's a place where you can get away with it. With a lot, because the wilderness is so vast that there's not, it's just easy to get away with this type of stuff.
It's a wild, wild west.
It is. It really is. And moving on from there, they get into the history of cannabis in the Emerald Triangle, right? And how hippies sort of moved in there into the 70s, it seemed to me like an extension of the San Francisco culture, right? And they moved out into this wilderness setting to try to live remotely. There was a family that talked about they had an outhouse and they didn't have any electricity, and that's how they wanted to live. That's how they wanted to raise their children.
Off the grid, they wanted to live off the land naturally, very hippie-oriented.
And, of course, naturally, when you have hippies, weed is beginning to cultivate, right? And I in my research, I didn't really find much weed cultivation before the 70s, although I'm sure it was there a little bit. That's sort of when people started realizing, like, oh, we can go way out in the wilderness, grow weed, and live this off the grid lifestyle. From there, they started making money, right? They started making money through weed, and it was the cannabis rush, much like the gold rush. And what started out as hippies turned into opportunists. And I just found that the whole story of this flock of hippies coming into the area, truly a fascinating sort of development of the population of the Emerald Triangle.
It's very hippie oriented, but like I think of hippies as being very peaceful people, and I think that at the beginning of this rush were very peaceful people, but as you mentioned, it became a business. Growing marijuana in that area became such a lucrative business that they needed to protect their crops, protect their family. And so these hippies, and they talk about this in the series, start carrying guns. Not just like, just not like sidearms, like full-on assault rifles, because they needed to protect their land. So these really kind of gentle hippies that came from that kind of San Francisco love, summer of '69, got a little bit more rugged, a little bit more rigid, a little bit more greedy, a little bit more dark.
I actually wrote down the quote, they were listening to the Grateful Dead, but carrying AR-15s.
Yeah.
And this is just to protect, because, when you're dealing with an illegal business, there's no way to protect it, both from law enforcement and from, thieves.
Or animals. I mean,
or animals or Bigfoot,
exactly.
So this was sort of the natural development of this Wild West weed cultivation scenario up there. And they're specifically talking about North Mendocino County, but it really falls under that like weird area where Trinity, Humboldt, and Mendocino meet. So then they get into the 90s a little bit. And the campaign against marijuana planting from the police camp, as they called it, basically brought in this militarization of the area to eradicate these crops, and it turned this otherwise somewhat peaceful area into a war zone.
I agree that kind of increase in the police force in the area forced these, what were probably a lot more subtle and less violent farmers, into this buying assault rifles, having ammunition available and always carrying arms with them. I do believe personally that increased police presence is part of the reason the violence occurred.
Well, and there was the story, I don't know if you remember, of this family who wasn't even growing cannabis. They were just living off the grid, and the cops came in, assumed they were, shot their dogs, and basically traumatized their children,
assuming they were growing weed because they lived in this area, and they with no evidence get on the property. The dog comes at them, they shoot the dog, And then they're like, oh, yeah, there's nothing here. Sorry, my bad. I'm out.
Yeah. And from there, you're really setting up a war zone, a guerrilla-style war zone in the vast wilderness of the Emerald Triangle, where they're setting up booby traps, both for thieves and for sheriffs, or whatever. Or I don't know if they're sheriff deputies or whatever. By the way, I looked it up. This camp program still exists.
That guy was hardcore. There was a couple guys, and they were just like, "Oh my god, weed is the just shut the hell up." Bro.
Well, I think they have shifted. Back then in the 90s, they're just taking anyone's crops because it was fully illegal. There was no one,
right? Whether
you're growing 1 or 1,000, there's no reason legally why you could be growing one, right? But now I think they're specifically going after cartel grows, illegal grows compared to the more legal grows in the area. So they talk about how, residents, because they're trying to hide from this militarization campaign, they go deep into the woods. They sort of camp out. They're, no one can find them, and they become sort of isolated and desocialized, right? And this is what turns into what we now see as the Wild West. No one talks to any police officer. If you have to deal with a problem or a troubled person, you deal with it within the community. You don't call the cops. And this is where it gets into sort of the Murder Mountain area.
Exactly.
I was actually fascinated. One of the guys said, he had friends out there who they're probably taking like meth or cocaine, trying to stay up all night and watch their crops, and they become sort of these feral people who really cannot, who have trouble integrating back into society.
I'm not getting too ahead of myself in saying that the theme of this is, I'd say, weed 1, Sasquatch 2, underlying meth 3, in my opinion.
Yeah, meth is
meth and stimulants.
We'll get into that
underlying
for sure.
Tone of this whole docuseries.
But yeah, it really just goes into how hippies turn into this campaign against these growers, and it turns really into the Wild West, where one officer said he thinks there's probably over 500 dead bodies just up in the hills. They don't necessarily know who they are, but they take care of these people themselves. They go dig a hole, bury them. A lot of these people could be illegal immigrants that they don't have any documentation on. Or no one really knows that's missing because they sort of left home and no one heard from them again.
Well, they talk about the thousands of missing persons, pieces of paper that are just all about the Emerald Triangle, and these people just disappeared off the face of the planet for no reason. And as you mentioned, that's not including the undocumented people that may have disappeared.
Right. It's the Holt House. Is it Holt House or Holt House?
Whatever.
Yeah, David. He said the missing person rate in the Emerald Triangle per capita is the highest in the United States by far. And he has a really telling other quote that I'm going to save for later here. So this moves into that sort of brings us up to current on the cannabis. Then let's get into Sasquatch, because they meet right in the middle here. Northern California is the official home of Bigfoot.
Right. Yeah.
There are the most sightings in the entire United States in Northern California, both in this Emerald Triangle area, the Humboldt area. You have up in Siskiyou County, up in Del Norte County. There's just tons and tons and tons of reported sightings, right?
We are the unofficial home.
The unofficial home.
Of
yeah. Yes, we are.
I mean, maybe official.
Yes. Yeah.
However you want to look at it.
Willow Creek, which is in Humboldt, gets put on the map by this Patterson-Gimlin film, where they actually have Bob Gimlin on the documentary talking about how they would go around this remote area of Humboldt, Willow Creek, and eventually get this. And if you would know the video if you saw it. It's the most famous Bigfoot video ever, right? And from there, Willow Creek now has a Bigfoot museum, and they have the Bigfoot Highway which goes through the area.
That video, somebody else talks about how that film of Bigfoot is what did I write down?
It's the gold standard.
It's the gold. It's the best video evidence of Sasquatch in existence.
Yes. What's your reaction when you see that video?
I mean, again, we're gonna save the spoilers for the end, but when I see it, I'm like, yeah, that's clearly a human. So
that's fake. That's the
reason that
it looks fake to me. And
so animals walk different.
He's walking like a human.
Animals walk different than us humans. And I know that Sasquatch is supposed to be whatever, like kind of the missing link, if you will, very human-esque features, but he's walking too much like a human. Actually, I think they refer to it as a her, right? They say it's a her. It's a
Bob
female.
Gimlin calls the Bigfoot a her. Yeah,
but initial reaction just funny. Looking, I was like, that is just a strut of a human man.
Correct. And I don't think we're getting ahead of ourselves. The man on the movie says, "Hey, they paid me to dress up like Sasquatch," even though Bob Gimlin says that guy's full of it. The guy says, no, yeah, I was in that suit and it's fake.
The opening of the second episode of this 3-part series is a guy holding literally the mask he was wearing in that video. And he's like, this is it. This is what you're seeing. This is exactly what happened. He's like, I thought it was hilarious. I was wearing jeans with my wallet. You could see
could see the wallet.
And it's just like, but the guy who filmed it stands by it. And it's just like, and they're neighbors. They talk about how they like wave at one another, but they have like completely opposite perspectives of this video.
And that's not a spoiler. I think this guy's been speaking out about that.
And it's not even at the end. It's literally the very opening scene of the second episode.
Right. So also, I mean, there's obviously a ton of Bigfoot sightings in this area, and it's specifically with cannabis growers because, like we said, they sort of meet in this wilderness area. Cannabis growers and Bigfoot are looking for the same region, right? They're remote, inaccessible. They just want to be left alone. They don't want anyone to stumble upon them by accident. And throughout this film, they're talking about the stories that cannabis growers would tell about Bigfoot screaming and hurling rocks at them. And there was the one guy, this is a little bit of a spoiler, who like starts crying, talking about how scared he was when he saw Bigfoot, right?
Floating in a river.
Yeah, he was walking through a river.
I watched that again this morning. The guy was floating down river, and he talks about how this thing was like covered in dreadlocks. It was like traditional.
Which kind of makes sense to me.
Like, I mean, yeah, but...
Like, Bigfoot doesn't wash his hair. Like, of course he'd have dreadlocks.
Fully... literally emotional. This guy was about to break down.
Yeah, that was
about seeing Sasquatch.
A legit hilarious part of this film. And it goes on to have a bunch of people who are clearly just Bigfoot people. Like they probably make their living off these Bigfoot stories, talking about all these, Bigfoot sightings. One professor even goes on to say that the Bigfoot evidence is overwhelming. The footprint evidence. Which is...
Have you seen any of those footprints? I mean, like, you see them, but it's comical how ridiculous they look.
Do you believe in Bigfoot?
Well, I mean, we're going to save the spoilers for the
Okay. We'll save it for later. Okay. So that's all I had on the Bigfoot section. So now I think it's only appropriate to talk about probably the most interesting part of this film, or this is it a film or a docuseries?
Docuseries.
Yeah, it's 2.5 hours. Just make it one film. I don't know why they have to do this now.
I have the exact same opinion.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it could have been cut substantially.
Yeah, agreed. So let's talk about the different characters because they really tell not only a story of the area, but a story of how all this craziness meets in the Emerald Triangle, right? So first and foremost, we have the journalist, David Holthouse. Mm-hmm. Just a fantastic journalist. Just I actually wrote this down in my notes. This guy's got balls.
I wouldn't call him a fantastic journalist.
I would.
You have a different opinion about him than I do, but my opinion for him, I lost a bit watching this.
he asks questions even though he knows he shouldn't be asking them. And look, I got a journalism degree, so I know how hard it is to ask those questions. To talk to someone directly and say, "Did you murder so and so?" That's hard. But his history is, he's done all these crazy stories. He was embedded with the Chicano street gang. He was embedded with neo-Nazis and drug runners. Like, that's like his world is doing these crazy stories.
So
right?
I think you're kind of glazing over the fact that he says, yes, I have embedded myself with neo-Nazis. I embedded myself in staying up doing crystal meth with.
Correct.
So he's very much acknowledging the fact that he has done meth before. Now, he doesn't go down that, but again, in my opinion, meth is very much an underlying tone of this
Correct. Well, and he goes into, not too deep, but he goes into how his journalism is to fight his demons, right? So he publicly came out against an accuser. He was raped as a child.
Which he was planning on killing. And I actually read an article this morning about how they go into way more detail about he moved to Denver or somewhere in Colorado, found out this guy lived in the same area, started stalking him, bought a gun, had a plan to kill him, went really, and then just decided, I'm not going to kill him, I'm just going to write about this, and did that.
He's a storyteller he's a little crazy, right?
I think all writers are a bit twisted. This guy might be a little bit on the outside. But.
Yes. So he is the key character. He's the one that takes you through this journey, and it becomes a crazy, wild journey at the end there, and we'll leave that for the spoilers. Next, I had Razor. So Razor...
I thought he was going to have a much bigger part than he did with the name like Razor for sure.
All these people have wild names, by the way. Most of them do. So he's kind of... throughout the movie, he gives you a glimpse into the world that was this cannabis culture back in the 90s. Excuse me. And he worked growing cannabis for the Hells Angels in this area. Got busted, went to San Quentin. And I think he still works in cannabis, but he's sort of a big resource of a lot of things in this film.
Yeah, he was just a guy that worked weed in the area in 1993. Again, this whole story comes down to the journalist hearing a guy talk about people being murdered because of Sasquatch. And so he calls this guy that he knew as being a weed farmer in the area around that time. Have you heard anything similar? Something maybe? Okay, we're going to put you in the doc.
Yeah. Ghost Dance. Ghost Dance is this old hippie.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that's what his name was. I actually really like that guy.
I wrote it down immediately. What a name, Ghost Dance.
He's the only one that actually rolls up a joint and smokes it in the film.
Yeah. He's this old hippie grower from the area, and a huge source of knowledge, not only of the people in this region currently, but of the history of it.
The culture. He's very much embedded in the community.
But he's also he has no fear of these people who seem to be. Everyone's scared of dealing with these killers out in whatever Emerald Triangle, and he's just like, yeah, I'll hit him up. I'll call him up.
He seemed like just a nice guy that everyone liked. That he wasn't worried because he's friends with everybody. He's just kind of this old guy that just smokes a bunch of weed. Who doesn't like an old guy that just smokes a bunch of weed all day?
No, I loved it though. In the film, he would ask Razor about this suspect in the murder, and he's like, oh, I don't want to talk about that guy. And then he asks another guy, he's like, oh, I'm not talking about that guy. And he goes to Ghost Dance. He's like, yeah, I'll call him right now.
You want to call him?
You try to call it on camera? You want it on camera? So that guy was hilarious, and just he totally looks the part as well. I loved him. I had to mention these people because they were hilarious. The Sasquatch hunters / life partners.
No, they were my favorite for sure. And they were not featured nearly enough.
They were not. I mean, he brought in some people just to provide context of Bigfoot in the area. But these people, they were like arguing about what they believe about Bigfoot. And
they open up by introducing them by one life partner saying to the other life partner, well, you believe that Sasquatch transports and teleports.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I don't. And he's like, yes,
and they're arguing.
And it's just like, This is electric content. Right
It
here.
was so
Give
funny.
me 5 more minutes with those guys.
And one even said, if I find Sasquatch, it will fill this huge hole I have in my life.
I feel like the majority of the people in that film feel the same way.
Correct.
They were the ones that had the collection of all of the footprints that I thought were just like, if you've ever seen like the Flintstones, you know, you can like make a fake human foot. It was as fake looking as you can get, in my opinion. I was like, this is your evidence. This is your evidence.
Well, the professor, he turned me on to the footprint stuff, because he's saying like, there is actual evidence, and he's like, I don't believe in Bigfoot, I believe in evidence, and there's a lot of evidence out there. So, but we don't have to go into that. Another person in this doc, big person, is Bigfoot Gary. Mm-hmm. Bigfoot Gary. So
he's just mentioned. We don't see him.
Well, he's a good 20-minute portion of.
He's the biggest character of the film.
Yeah. So, by the way, so I know some people from this area. I know some people who grew cannabis in this area, and I've heard a lot of stories like of Bigfoot Gary. So not of him specifically, but of people like him. And so Bigfoot Gary is one of the top dogs growing in this area. He is. He's
a big guy that likes to walk around barefoot, and that's why
they call him Bigfoot Gary. Yes.
He's not Bigfoot. He doesn't dress up like Bigfoot. He just walks around barefoot, and he has big feet.
He had, and this is quoting a police officer in the film, he had football fields of pot. They said somewhere in the 90s, they seized $150 million worth of plants, and the officer said that was only the tip of the iceberg of what he was growing up there. And he becomes one of the suspects of this triple homicide, right, throughout this movie. I have to mention the chick on meth in the Boomers parking lot. As Holthouse is going through this film, he is finding these different characters to try to get information. He meets this girl at a bar, and she offers him a hit of meth. He says no. She hits the meth, gets in the car with him, and spills her guts.
I think what he said is that I offered her a drink. She said no. I smelled the sweet smell of methamphetamine. Yeah. Then she offered me a hit. I turned it down. We'll see. And that's how the story went. And then, she's blurred out, but you can hear what she says.
Yes. I also want to talk about, as a character of the show, Spyrock. Spyrock Road is sort of the area where everyone talks about is where they're growing a ton of pot up there, and it's the Wild West. It's sort of like the Murder Mountain.
It is Murder Mountain, basically.
Correct. Yeah. And that is a character of the show, because everyone's like, up on Spyrock. I
agree with that.
So that was interesting. Who did I miss?
The chick on meth talks about her son, and I have her son, and I'll talk about my kind of timeline of ridiculousness of this film coming up. But I guess I'll mention him, but he's not ever shown or talked to. They just refer to him.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's fair. So I have one other character, but this will be in spoilers. So are we ready for spoilers? Have we covered sort of everything that's unspoiler? Check your notes here.
Here's one thing that did stick out to me, and this is not really a spoiler, but one thing that really kind of drove home to me a little bit, that makes it a little bit more feasible for Bigfoot to exist, is there was that I think he was a scientist, and he talks about how people say, well, why haven't we ever found Bigfoot bones? If they've been around this long, we should have found some physical evidence. That's a great point. Yep. Yeah. He's like, well, there's an estimated, let's say 300 Sasquatch, which again, I think is a bit ridiculous, but this was his numbers. Mm-hmm. And he was saying that if 300 is the number of Bigfoots that exist, there are 100 times more black bears in that area than Bigfoots. So there would be whatever, 3,000, 30, whatever.
100 black bears for every Bigfoot.
Correct.
Yep.
Rarely do people find black bear bones. And so that was his argument about not finding. And that is not a terrible point to make. Like, you see deer bones, you rarely see like a bear skull. And so I was like, okay, we've done a lot of hiking. I've never found bear bones in my life. So I was like, okay, that's somewhat valid. But I mean, again, just the idea of him saying from kind of a scientist's perspective that 300 Bigfoots exist in Northern California was. But
we do see a lot of bears, though.
But you don't see, and his point was, you don't see the physical evidence after they die. We haven't found Bigfoots. They are reclusive by reputation. But black bears are as well. And so I found that fact. I wrote that down because I was like, you know what? That's not a terrible point to make. We haven't found bones, but they are by nature very, very skittish, if you will, and they try to hide and stay away from people. So I did appreciate that. Again, I don't want to spoil much.
I honestly
that
think
was a thing I wanted to mention.
I think Bigfoot teleporting makes a ton of sense. If you're really trying to prove in your mind that Bigfoot exists, he just teleports. You see him real quick, and then he's gone, right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. Absolutely. Okay, so let's just get into spoilers. Should we take a quick break first? No?
Yeah, let's take a quick break. You want to talk about store.activenorcal.com?
Let's talk about our new store.activenorcal.com. We got shirts, we got hats, we got stickers.
Hella merch.
We got sweatshirts. We're really excited to bring this to everyone in Northern California. Rep your region while you're out on the trails, at a restaurant, because we can go to restaurants now, wherever you want to go. Rep Northern California the right way, store.activenorcal.com. And if you use the code NorCal, 10% off your first order. You can't make this stuff up. So
take advantage of it. NorCal. Promo code NorCal. 10% off. Store.activenorcal.com.
Okay, so now let's get into the spoilers. If you have not seen this and you want to see this, go watch it. It's on Hulu. It's 3 episodes. It's like 2.5 hours total. Go watch it. Come back, listen to this. If you're not going to watch it, just keep listening, because we're going to go into what actually happens.
Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert.
Spoilers, yes. So this movie goes on a wild ride to find this murder, right? First and foremost, he reveals that the person who told him the story about Bigfoot
was a renowned tweaker.
Super high on meth. So as soon as he said that, I'm like, really? This is what we're on a search for? This meth head story? This tweaker story? So that sort of...
There were 2 people, though, right? Weren't there 2? Was it just one? I remember there being 2 people that kind of were telling the story to a third person that he overheard. So, but yes, the guy
right.
telling the story was a renowned meth head.
Right. As are a lot of people, it turns out, up in this
underlying
area.
Tone.
Yes. The men murdered turned out to be illegal Mexican immigrants.
So I wrote down the timeline of the story change, and this might be a good time for me to read it to you, of how the story evolves. Okay. And this is part of why I think this documentary was just ridiculous. Okay. So the story starts with Bigfoot kills 3 guys at a pot farm in 1993. That's the beginning. That is, if you watch the trailer, that is the underlying tone. We talked about that at the beginning. This is how the story changes throughout the 3 episodes. It goes from 3 people killed at a pot farm in 93 to only 1 guy died. And then the killer, maybe, was a guy by the name of Bigfoot Gary. So we go from Sasquatch killing 3 people to only 1 person died, that being a Mexican national, and he was killed by a guy named Bigfoot Gary.
Right.
That's a very big change in story just from the very beginning, okay?
But this is the whole point of this journalism approach that he takes. He took this story of people dying and he weaves it into this true crime documentary, which I thought was brilliant. But
I'm not. Yeah. So we're not even a quarter of the way done with this ridiculous timeline. So after this, we take a bit of a detour from Bigfoot Gary and Bigfoot himself, and we interview this crystal meth user from Boomers who who said that her 5-year-old son witnessed a man murdered with a shotgun when he was with his father, who was working at a pot farm in the area. This child was so close to this murder that this blood from the splatter of the shotgun hit the kid in the face, and blood even got in his mouth. His mom is going into great detail. Then, the next time he interviews her, clearly after she's a little bit off the meth, she realizes that this happened in 1996. Her son was born in 91, so her son was only 2 years old when this particular crime occurred. So we have just now wasted 15 minutes going down this crazy meth head story. Okay, then we go back to Bigfoot Gary. Then the story changes from Bigfoot Gary killed one Mexican national to killed 3 Mexican nationals because they raped his daughter in 1993. Valid story. That becomes like, oh, you know what? That sounds fairly feasible. Then they actually get a hold of Bigfoot Gary. Bigfoot Gary didn't have children in 1993, so this is not.
He didn't have a daughter. At
all.
least I don't know if he had children at all. He didn't have a daughter, and it checks out. He did not have a daughter in 1993, so that story is ludicrous.
Now, the very final point is kind of the ultimate spoiler, so I'll save it to the very end. But I mean, that's just kind of how you see the story evolving in such ridiculous ways.
But I didn't see it as ridiculous. This guy went in with one story and he turns it into this whole true crime. I thought that was okay because he is just giving us information as he's finding it. This is his journey we're going on. There are a lot of underlying things in this film. One is racism towards the Mexicans, which is probably, some of it is just pure racism, and some of it is they don't want the Mexican cartel coming in and taking over their area. There was a video, and this is why this journalist, David Holthouse, is brave. He was not allowed to film these guys, and he still attached a secret camera on himself, and he had this local grower guy talking about these killings, and he was calling them the N-words and just showing overt racism. So he was able to prove that, yes, indeed, this is, and they go into this area is very racist, stemming from the original massacre of the Wyatt tribe 150 years before. But they also talk
about how this, we talked about how it started as kind of a hippie movement, but it became more of a commerce and a more of a gold rush, if you will. And there were some cartel-like characters that were starting to work for these great hippies, but these older hippies became older and not as able to protect themselves. And in the movie, they say some of these immigrants were kind of forcing these hippies out and kind of taking over their farms. And so they're saying how that kind of generated some of this mild this racism.
Yes, and this is the Mexican cartel growing up in the Emerald Triangle illegally on public lands is still a huge problem. They make a massively terrible name for these pot growers by using chemicals that kill the wildlife, that kill
leaving garbage behind.
Plants. They leave all the plants. Yeah. And actually, there's a video on the journalist Holthouse's secret camera of this guy from Sinaloa who is growing up there, and it's just trash everywhere, and it's kind of, the guy's living in this tiny shack and
looks like meth.
Yes. So I don't know what else there is to say other than just get it, just to reveal what happens at the end.
Spoiler.
So he sort of hits this dead end, right? He hits this dead end where it's not Bigfoot Gary. It's not all these stories that he thought it was. It wasn't the girl's son who saw it. It wasn't all these things. So he gets a hold of the person who owned the shack in which he heard this story, right?
The guy he worked for in
the guy he was probably trimming for or whatever in the 90s. And the guy who is over the phone refuses to have his name, said, and quite frankly, David, who has embedded himself with neo-Nazis and the cartel or all these people, he's like, I'm scared of this guy.
Absolutely.
Do not reveal anything
He
about
says,
him.
Whoever edits this documentary,
Yes.
do not use
Which
this
I
guy's
thought
name.
was super telling. This guy reveals the whole story behind this murder. The old time growers were worried about the Mexicans coming in and taking over the farms, and as we just discussed, and they were high out of their mind. Right? They were
Crystal
smoking
meth
meth,
high, not 420 high.
doing cocaine.
both.
He says like these guys were crazy, out of their mind, on
Stimulant
drugs.
of choice is how he put it.
So, and they don't want any outsiders coming in, whether they're trying to grow, whether they're just stumble upon them. So they start telling these stories of Sasquatch in the area, and they create this huge lore that Sasquatch is running around, hurling rocks, is aggressive, is charge bluffing people. They start all these stories. Then they wanted these 3 Mexican immigrants who are growing. For whatever reason, and I don't think they even went into it.
They didn't.
They wanted to make an example of them. You can't come on to our area and start growing. So
they pissed off the wrong guy, and they were going to make examples of these guys.
Correct. And so they went over and they basically murdered these guys. They ripped them apart, and they made the entire scene look like Sasquatch did it.
Staged completely. They said they brought in like big like actual tractors and stuff to try to make it look like there could not be anything but a Sasquatch that did this.
And because of the rumor mill of this area, how everything is playing telephone back and forth through this Emerald Triangle, they were basically framing Sasquatch for murder.
And they were using these tweaker big mouths to spread the rumor. The guy that the journalist hears telling the story was somebody that the guy who staged all of it wanted to see the scene, brought him to that farm so that this tweaker guy, who as by reputation has a big mouth, will see this and then we'll go tell everybody, and this will spread like wildfire. You show enough tweakers that and they believe it, they're going to tell everybody they know, and next thing you know, the idea was to scare the cartel people that are coming.
A lot of different people, I think. Any outsiders, they wanted to send a message.
Don't come here because Sasquatch doesn't like it, and he will tear you limb from limb.
Correct. So I thought that was a fascinating ending to the film, and it makes a ton of sense, right? And I wanted to, the Holt House ends the film with a quote, and I'm sorry for the language with this quote, but this is what he says, and I think it's a little revealing. "This place is fucked up beyond belief. People pass through here and just see how beautiful it is in terms of the natural environment. They have no idea the shit that goes on in this area." I found that really telling because we specifically highlight the natural beauty of the area when, quite frankly, I mean, I think I have a pretty good idea of what goes on there. Especially just to the average person. I think I have a better idea than the average person, but this stuff just kind of blows it out of the water.
I will say my takeaway was utter disappointment. I had high expectations that this journalist, who has a great reputation of doing a lot of research, was going to probably find the best evidence that Bigfoot existed in Northern California that anybody could find, and he would present it in his documentary, which I think he probably did. And that evidence to me is ludicrous. I wanted to believe in Bigfoot so bad. This documentary
debunks it.
Proved to me that Bigfoot does not exist. Because if that is the best evidence you could come up with, this is a bullshit thing.
Well, and he had locals saying, "Yeah, we made all these Bigfoot stories up. We did it to keep outsiders out." And he has the guy who said he wore the Sasquatch costume and the most famous Bigfoot. So yes, I completely agree. This is bad optics for the Bigfoot people.
The first so they could have cut the entire second episode out. It goes through, I mean, and again,
I actually enjoyed the second episode.
You're talking about like following the story, but it just became one fake story after another that to me is just a waste of my time to watch. Like go do that as research and you follow, but you don't need to make this a 2.5 hour film of 90% of it being shit that has nothing to do with the actual storyline.
Yeah, but I found
this person was on meth and heard this. This person was on meth and heard that. And it's just like, okay, that's clearly wrong. Okay, that's clearly wrong.
But it's his journey. I mean, this is,
I think selling this as a Sasquatch documentary was the only way he could sell this. But to call
Correct.
this a Sasquatch documentary feels like a slap in the face to Sasquatch.
That's fair. No, it's the journey. That's like saying you want to watch The Hobbit, but you just want to skip to where he throws the ring off. Like, it's the journey of finding the truth. I agree it was a little too long, but
This is Murder Mountain, but we throw in this monster that could potentially be doing. It's ridiculous.
why is that ridiculous? I thought that was a cool way to frame it. Especially because at the end, it tells you that these locals are making up Bigfoot and staging huge murder-framed scenes to scare people away. I thought that was fascinating.
I wanted there to be some evidence that I was like, well, nothing. There was every single piece of evidence that Bigfoot has or has ever existed to me looks so fake that it's disappointing.
I don't believe in Sasquatch.
But
so.
It is 420. It was a weed-focused documentary.
Correct.
I love that. I loved that old dude rolling up the joint, smoking the joint on film. He busted out the Sasquatch stuffed animal, and while he's sitting there smoking a joint, that part that I enjoyed because I think personally that Napa wine is the best in the country. I think Humboldt weed is the best in the country, and I don't think that'll change. So I appreciate them dropping it on 420. It's really more of a weed documentary than a Sasquatch documentary. It's really more of a murder documentary than anything. But I was a little disappointed. Again, the underlying tone being meth. I wasn't a huge fan of that, but I know it's a reality of the environment.
Yeah. I actually really liked it, and I like the history of the area, and I like the underlying issues that are in this Emerald Triangle area. I find it fascinating, and you're right. It's like Murder Mountain, but I loved Murder Mountain.
Yeah, but Murder Mountain doesn't hide. They don't try to hide the true story by saying, "Oh, Sasquatch," But
no. You're completely wrong about this because that is the story. They framed Sasquatch.
Right, but this journalist at 0 point in time actually believed Bigfoot existed.
Correct. But that's why he wanted to go and prove it wrong.
I think that was his idea of how he was going to sell this documentary to Hulu. If I throw Sasquatch in this, they will buy it. If this is just another Murder Mountain, who gives a shit?
But it was Sasquatch in the end who was framed for it. You know? Sasquatch is a full part of this story. And I find the history of Sasquatch in the area fascinating in itself because why is Northern California, such a big part of the story of Bigfoot? Why? And this is a story why, right?
Yeah.
Because people are trying to keep him out.
At the end of it, I was like, that's it. That was it. I just had so much higher expectations for how the film was
that they were gonna prove that Bigfoot killed. Like they couldn't have done that.
Yeah, I guess I just had so much higher expectations for the film, especially so he did Night Stalker, which I watched earlier this year. What a great series about somebody who actually factually existed. Bigfoot, maybe I'm gonna go back and I'll watch it again today. It's 420. We're gonna. Embrace the day, and I'll watch it again. And again, I watched the first episode again this morning, and I watched the whole series last night. I don't know. Kind of pissed me off.
All right. Well,
I apologize. We're a Positive Vibes podcast, but I just wanted it to be so much better than it was.
Okay. Well, I don't understand that because you knew he wasn't going to prove Sasquatch was real because then it would be a much bigger story.
It made all of the people that were experts on Sasquatch, to me, it made it very clear to me that these people are just
full of it.
Insane.
Did you not think that beforehand?
I just was hoping. Even that guy, they should have spent more time on that guy, the actual scientist, Give me 5 more minutes with that guy. Give me more evidence as opposed to these two life partners that are arguing whether Sasquatch teleports or not. These are your experts?
Well, I think that's
I mean,
probably
that
the
was
best you can find in
it
the
was
Bigfoot
entertaining.
community.
It was entertaining.
I think that's the best you can find in the Bigfoot community. All right, that's it. Bob's upset. I actually really liked it. It was a fun way to spend 420 with the history and the region of Northern California that mass produces the best marijuana in the world, and that's how I was able to spend my 420. So I had a blast.
It was entertaining. I will say that I enjoyed watching it. The story itself, which has nothing to do with the actual documentary, I guess, irritated me.
And that does it for our very first live show. Well, I guess it's not our first.
420.
420. Yes. So if you're watching this, wherever you're watching it, thank you for watching. We appreciate you hanging through. We hope we didn't spoil anything for you. Go watch it on Hulu, Sasquatch. I thought it was good. And enjoy your 420 responsibly. How about that? I'll say that. And thank you, as always, for listening to the Talking NorCal podcast. Make sure you subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Again, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, both Talking NorCal, Active NorCal. We're always putting out our clips and sharing fun stuff with you guys. And happy 420. And remember, stay active.
NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and I could spend all day just chilling in the South Bay. We're NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and Darren knows how to kick it down in Santa Cruz. We're NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and we get a little cray-cray when we visit the East Bay. We're NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and we get a little mental when we visit Sacramento. Yeah, we're NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and we partake in nature's bounty when we visit Humboldt County. Yeah, we're NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and me, I'm hella cool 'cause I live in Sebastopol. We're NorCal, we're hella NorCal, and you know that we gotta go